Hi everyone, welcome back to ADEX Pixel Expo and in celebration of World Ocean Week. We are closing our live session for today with another guest of the hour. His name is Vincent Kneefel, and he is actually the global lead at WWF for Plastic Smart Nation. And he's also a wildlife photographer and a diver. Without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Vincent. Vincent, here you go.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. Hello from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I have a presentation prepared to talk really more about my passion for the ocean and some of the work that I'm currently doing. So, yeah, let me just first introduce myself. So my name is Vincent Kneefel, and the reason why I'm here and why I'm talking to you is really because of my passion for the ocean and wildlife. My passion for the ocean started when I became a dive instructor. After my high school, I was able to travel for a year around the world and work as a PADI dive instructor in South Africa and Southeast Asia. And that year really triggered me to dive into the beauty of the underwater world, but at the same time also realizing the fragility and the degradation of natural ecosystems underwater. So from that sense of purpose, I started doing underwater photography. So over the last decade or 15 years or so, I've been traveling around the world as an underwater photographer, working for magazines, but also publishing a book on underwater photography. Here you can actually see a photo of me taking a photo of an endangered leatherback turtle in Trinidad and Tobago. But over the time that I spent the world traveling and doing stories on the ocean, I've literally seen natural ecosystems decline. Populations of species go down, coral reefs disappear. And it was about a year and a half ago that I was given the opportunity by WWF to take on a role within the organization to join them and to work on coral reef conservation and to also work on the topic of plastics. So what I'd like to do actually for my presentation is take you back on a journey that I made in March last year to the Coral Triangle region. And this was actually my first work visit on behalf of WWF, where I was able to visit our offices and also field projects in Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Maybe first a little bit about the seascape of the Coral Triangle, because this is truly one of the most critical and important natural ecosystems existing today. This is the Amazon of the underwater world. There's more species of corals within the Coral Triangle than anywhere in the world. So the Coral Triangle extends from Indonesia, the Philippines, all the way to Papua New Guinea. And this biodiverse region is, like I said, not only the host of many different species of coral, but also supports the livelihood of millions of people through fisheries and through tourism. We've been working as WWF on coral reef conservation in this area for a number of decades now. And of course, it is very challenging because there's a number of factors at play. We're seeing overfishing at large scale. We're seeing unsustainable harvesting, dynamite fishing, all different factors that are leading to the degradation of the ecosystem. What is also important to notice is that this region, this really biodiverse region, sits in the middle of one of the most populated areas on the planet. If you look at the circle that I've drawn out on this map, over half of the global population lives within the circle. So as a result, it's also putting a lot of pressure on the natural ecosystem surrounding this area, as well as the Coral Triangle. So during my visit in Indonesia, I was able to visit the Indonesian office in Bali. And while I had the weekend off, I had the opportunity to go back to one of my favorite dive spots, which is in Nusa Penida, just off Bali, which is really well known for its manta ray population. And over the years, it's become a very popular tourism destination. On a given day, you'll find probably anywhere between 30 to 40 boats with tourists who are snorkeling, who are coming just to see these beautiful manta rays. And for me, manta rays are very special because they're probably the animal that I feel the deepest connection with. If you're in the water with a manta ray, there's a sort of a relationship, and you recognize each other. So it's very different from swimming with, for example, a whale shark or other fish species. A manta ray has a higher level of intelligence, and they actually have the largest ratio of their brain to body ratio. So their brains are much bigger than other fish species. So here I was snorkeling happily with these beautiful manta rays, snapping away some photos. And while these manta rays were swimming around me, I noticed one manta ray that came a little bit closer, and I saw something hanging on its fin. And this beautiful manta ray swam underneath me, and when I looked closer, I saw that it was a piece of a wrap piece of plastic. So this manta ray swims underneath me and sort of gently shakes off the piece of plastic from its wing. So I was surprised because I hadn't seen any plastic in the water before. But almost at the same moment when I turned around, I saw a huge swat of plastic soup sort of drifting towards the area where the manta rays are. And this area probably extended for at least, I would say, a kilometer. And never before I had seen so much plastic drifting in the ocean. So I was actually kind of curious just to see what all the different items are. And as you can see from this photo, a number of items are instantly recognizable. So you have some of the disposable cups. You can see some straws. There's other types of packaging. But as you can see, these are all the items that every one of us uses in our daily lives. So yeah, so as I was snorkeling along the plastic, taking photos and really trying to sort of take in what was happening around me. And then in the corner of my eye, I saw something very bright, something very pink, and something that shouldn't really be there either. And when I looked at that closer, it actually turned out to be a school bag, probably from a girl that was 5 or 6 years old. Somehow ended up in the ocean, but now had become a nursery for smaller fish. And at the time that I saw it and I took photos of it, I was thinking about maybe taking it with me. But at the same time, I knew that it was now providing a shelter for these little fish. So it was a real difficult decision to leave it behind. Well, not much later, when the manta rays came to the surface, it's when they actually started feeding. Usually the plankton sits on the sort of the edge of the two currents. And this is also where the plastic soup was drifting towards to. So for me, it was really, almost, I would say that it was very dramatic to see these beautiful manta rays feed in between all these different pieces of plastics, knowing that eventually, this can do a lot of harm. I've spoken to researchers after, and they've actually found that this population of manta rays in Nusa Penida ingests on average around 50 to 60 pieces of plastics an hour when they're feeding. So amazingly, they're still there. They're surviving. There have been some strandings of manta rays, potentially also related to plastic. But a large share of the concern is also around the ingestion of microplastics and the impact on the ability to sexually reproduce over time. But for me, this sort of was a pivotal moment to see an animal that I loved so dearly and that was so close to me be confronted with plastic waste and items that really shouldn't be a part in our oceans. Sadly, now on a yearly basis, millions of animals die because of the ingestion of plastic. And I'm sure a lot of you will have seen those dramatic images, will have seen Blue Planet and other documentaries highlighting this issue. What I'd like to talk about is where is this problem actually coming from and what can we do about it? So the next morning after my dive trip, I decided to go to the beach to see, to find plastic pollution. And actually one of my colleagues recommended me go early, go around 6 o'clock just after sunrise, and you'll see it. And indeed, when I arrived at this particular beach just south of the airport, plastic was everywhere. But not much later, there was a very big group of hardworking ladies coming, and they're cleaning up this beach in its entirety. It probably took them around 2 hours to take away, I would say, probably 95% of all the items on the beach, which is really impressive, but it's also a lot of hard work. And this particular group of people is supported financially by Coca-Cola. And not surprisingly, you'll also find Coca-Cola products on the beach because it's such a popular product, and a lot of people are consuming it. But Coca-Cola in this case is doing this as part of their outreach. But the crazy thing is that these cleanups, they happen almost every day, consistently, and they're cleaning out tons of materials. And this is a beach that is more popular, so there's more tourists, and as such, there's a real incentive to clean it up. But there's obviously also a lot of beaches that go uncleaned. Scientific research has shown that only a fraction of all the plastic that ends up in the ocean goes back to the beach. So cleaning efforts are really important, but they don't really address the root cause of the problem. So that is really what I want to talk about with you further. But yeah, this is another image I wanted to share. These were some fishermen that had just returned from a long night out at sea, and they were actually in the process of cleaning their nets. And they were telling me that over the last night they had only caught 3 small fish, and the rest of their net was just littered with the plastic. It turns out that a lot of the plastic is also quite seasonal, so there are certain periods where there's a lot more in the water than other periods, especially related to the monsoon. But hearing them, I know this sort of new trend of encountering plastic had only really occurred in the last 2 to 3 years. So also for them, this is something that is directly impacting their livelihoods and is also increasing in numbers. So my next stop on this trip was Jakarta. And this is where the WWF Indonesia team took me to a number of sites. And the first site they took me to was the estuary, which sits next to the harbor in Jakarta. And this is sort of the river mouth. So this is where one of the main rivers ends up out in the ocean, and where there's also a mangrove area. And as you can see from this drone photo, all this area is just scattered with plastic. It's probably the size of easily around 10 football fields. And the amount of plastic is probably around 1 meter deep. So it's a huge quantity, and it's so much that they they can't even clean it up. So just seeing the sheer size and seeing this plastic flowing from the river, but at the same time also new plastic arriving from the ocean, it is shocking just seeing this much plastic. So as you can see on this photo, there's a little forest, and behind that there's a fishing village. So when I walked back to our car together with my colleagues, we ended up talking with some of the local villagers, and one of their main sources of income is are these little shells that they harvest from the riverbanks. Overall, this is probably one of the poorest populations in Jakarta, and this is really critical for them. Our research from together with other universities has found that on average, an average person around the world already ingests around 5 grams of microplastics on a weekly basis. For these people, where they also have a lot of shellfish in their diet, that is probably even a lot more. So there's also a lot of health concerns related to plastics that we have to take into account, and in this case, it's also again impacting their livelihoods, income, and also personal health. So continuing walking back to the car, I heard some kids laughing, and to my surprise, I encountered this playground where 2 kids were really happy just to be surrounded by plastic. And having been just surrounded by plastic in the mangrove and just being shocked by the sheer amount of plastic pollution, also recognizing and seeing these kids, that plastic can also bring a lot of joy and actually has a lot of benefits to our daily existence and well-being. And for these kids, totally unaware of the issue of plastic pollution and how close this is to their homes. So going even further upstream on the river, this is a river that I encountered that was just completely blocked with plastic. And as you may already tell a little bit, a lot of these items are garbage bags, are styrofoam packaging, are mostly household waste. And I took a couple of videos of this particular river as well, and you could just see new items arriving on almost every second. And in this case, it ended up being so much that the whole river just clogged. The WWF team also, after seeing this, they notified the local municipality, and they cleaned out the river within the next couple of weeks. But it wasn't until probably like 3 or 4 months after that the same issue occurred again. So the same principle, like you can clean up, but as long as the plastic keeps flowing into the rivers, there's going to be problems. So the next stop was one of these little neighborhoods within the heart of the center of Jakarta. And I think here we ended up somewhat like at the source of the problem, a highly dense urban area, lower income, with people living closer to a river. And as you can see, the river itself is just highly polluted with plastic, but also with sewage. And I can tell you that the smell there was just incredibly bad. I ended up speaking to one of the people who had lived there for probably the last 45 years. And he told me that when he was young, he actually he was swimming with his friends in the same river. And at the time, plastic wasn't really in use, so there was no plastic in this river. Over time, as the population increased and more people ended up living near, the river became more dirty. But particularly in the last 10 years, plastic pollution has become an issue. In this particular neighborhood, there are no household collection services. So also because of the amount of space that people have, there's virtually no other option than throwing your garbage into the river. If you leave it in your house, it smells, and the only other option is to probably bring it away somewhere, which is like a 2-kilometer walk. So as a result, what people do is they throw it in the river. And when I was walking on the side of this river, several times I just saw garbage bags going over my head and splashing into the water, because it's such a normal thing for people to do, again, because they don't have another option. And like I said, plastic is a relatively sort of new product. It's also somewhat of a paradox, because on the one hand, it's an incredibly amazing product. It's light, it's cheap, but it's also indestructible. And we've been consuming more and more of it. This is a particular supermarket in Indonesia, and the sheer amount of packaging is overwhelming. But this is not just in Indonesia, this is around the world, in every country. And plastic really has become a really large part of our daily lives. In a way that is not an issue, but with the amount of plastic that we're consuming and also the amount of waste that we're producing on a daily basis, that is really where the problem starts. Most of the waste that we produce goes to landfill. This is a particular landfill in Bali. Over 1.5 million kilos of waste is discarded here on a daily basis. For Jakarta, which the greater Jakarta region has a population of around 30 million people, that's where it's almost 14 million kilos a day. So these are incredible numbers. And as you can see with this particular landfill, the landfill in itself is already overflowing. Bali also has a big problem because this landfill is now almost full. Parts of the landfill are on fire and they can't actually manage it anymore. So there's a real issue there. And again, not so much only an issue for only Indonesia, but also for other countries around the world. I also took the opportunity to actually go to a landfill and to speak with people and be with people who are waste picking. So there's a lot of people who make their livelihoods from obtaining the higher value items from the landfill and selling those onto the market. So think about, for example, PET bottles. This is incredibly hard, but also dangerous work. I mean, these landfills, they can collapse. It smells terribly. The temperature often is above 40 degrees Celsius. So what these people are doing is just, it really is incredible work. And yet they're being paid so little to do that work. So I just want to take a step back and talk about the issue at hand, because we've been using plastic now for the last, let's say, roughly 70 years. The first synthetic plastic materials were produced around the 1950s. And as you can see, especially in the last 20 years, we've been consuming and producing a lot more plastic. Actually, so much that half of all the virgin plastic produced have occurred in just those last 20 years. Now, the projection is that in the next, within the next 10 years, we actually are looking to see an increase of more than 40%. And again, just highlighting the issue is that it's not so much in the consumption of the plastic itself where it's the problem, but it's really that a lot of the plastic becomes waste almost instantaneously after we use it. So there's a lot of single-use plastics as part of the new plastics that are being produced. And those are the lower value materials. And as such, because they're so lower value, they're also less likely to be recycled, and they're more likely to end up on a landfill or not being collected. Historically, less than 10% or around 10% of all the plastic that has been produced has been recycled. So recycling in itself is not really a solution. We really need to get to a position where we reuse our plastic much more than we're currently doing. Like I just said, 61% of all the marine plastic is lower value. So because there's less of an incentive to recycle, those are the items that are more likely to end up with waste that is being uncollected. So those are the items that end up in the rivers. And most of those items are single-use items. So cheap packaging, such as the cups or the sachets. And those are also the types of plastics that are much harder to recycle, or where there's not really an economic incentive to recycle. Another really important thing to recognize is that around 75% of all the land-based leakage in the ocean comes from uncollected household waste. Well, we saw in the photos from Jakarta, how this happens, but this is occurring in cities from around the world, and primarily in developing nations. So in today's world, around 60% of all the leakage occurs in Southeast Asia, in 5 countries. That's in China, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. But if you look ahead at the forecast, actually most of the growth will be coming from Africa. And the reason, again, why this is happening is because there's no existing waste management, and there's no household collection happening in those areas. And in a business as usual scenario, in just the next 10 years, the amount of plastic in the ocean could double. I showed you the projection earlier with an increasing consumption of 40% of plastic. Well, that is the reason why the amount could double, is because most of the growth actually occurs in those developing countries, and that's where most of the increase in consumed plastics are occurring. I also want to highlight that the plastic footprint of people in the Western world, so in Europe and North America, is many times higher than in these developing countries. So on average, a person in the Netherlands consumes almost 10 times as much plastic as somebody in Indonesia. So how are we going to solve it for this? Because this is a huge issue. And this is where our WWF initiative comes in, which is no plastic in nature. And our goal is to stop the leakage of plastic into nature by 2030. So in just in the next 10 years. And we're doing that by focusing on 3 key areas. So first of all, we need to close the tap. So we need to reduce the amount of plastic that's being produced. Because the unlimited production of virgin plastics makes it also a lot harder for recycled plastics to compete. Secondly, we need to close the loop. So we need to innovate, redesign, but especially reuse the plastic, and where possible, recycle. And then finally, we need to ensure that there is zero leakage into nature. And we need to do that by vastly improving collection and waste management around the world. So our initiative really spans 3 key areas. So it's working with companies on new business models and innovations. It's working on global policy. So we're advocating for a global treaty around plastic pollution, and ensuring that it's not just the countries in the developing nations that are burdening this problem, but that really this is being solved on a global level. And then the third area that we're working in is plastic smart cities. And that is where we're trying to develop pilot projects and showcases of cities that have successfully addressed this issue at the city level. Also, really important to understand, almost 60% of all the leakage of plastic occurs in urban areas. So it's estimated that by 2050, over 2/3 of the population will live in cities. Also, by that time, we expect the consumption levels will be much higher in plastic in cities versus rural areas. So being able to showcase that we can stop and address this issue in those high polluting sites is really key. Yeah, this is a small call to action. I wanted to ask you to please sign our petitions for a global treaty on plastic. We currently already have over 1.7 million people who have signed the petition. And if you go to the link on top, you can also sign and ask your national government to support this deal. Yeah, and then on the plastic smart cities work, that's where we're working in those 5 countries where we're seeing the highest levels of plastic pollution. Working with cities in these countries and testing some of the new models that exist. So trying to reduce the overall plastic in the system, but also working with local entrepreneurs on reuse systems. While we're, for example, working with the city government on improving waste management and increasing the number of people who have household collection services. We have a website, plasticsmartcities.org, where you can also find now over 100 best practices that are trying to address this issue from both from reduction as well as the end of the life cycle. So I wanted to end my presentation also on a hopeful note. One, I would want to say there's still a lot to fight for. So even though the topic of plastic pollution may feel overwhelming, we're really seeing a huge high level of engagement on this topic, and organizations from around the world, from both businesses to governments to NGOs, are trying to work and tackle on this issue. Secondly, yeah, there's still a lot of wildlife and natural ecosystems that exist. I mean, this is a photo of a sea turtle that I took in Manado in Bunaken National Park, which is in the north of Sulawesi. And that is actually one of an area that is highly polluted and where there's a lot of plastic in the water. I had been there around 10 years before, but to my surprise, when I came back last year, I saw more turtles than ever before. So that also is a hopeful sign. And then the last message I wanted to share with you is around ocean conservation in more general terms. I think it's really key that we try and tackle this issue of plastic in our oceans. We need to have clean oceans for our future generations, but it's not enough. We also need to ensure that we not only not pollute our oceans anymore, but also that we stop overfishing, that we better protect our ocean. Currently, only 5% of the ocean is protected, and that we address an issue like global warming, because that is eventually also endangering the future of many of these natural ecosystems, such as mangroves and coral reefs. So yeah, the positive thing I think is we've seen a lot of engagement around this topic. A lot of people are concerned, and we're seeing a lot of action. I think it's also our responsibility as ocean advocates to talk about ocean health in more general terms and really make people aware of what is happening and how we can solve the problems that currently exist. So with that, yeah, this is the end of my presentation. I wanted to open up the floor for any questions.
Thank you, for a very interesting look into to Asia. I think that's the question. The best approach for ocean plastic, or may it be plastic waste, releasing into the ocean through rivers. Would it be better to manage it via land, or would it be better to
Nora, you are breaking up. I think, yeah, you're back again. Sorry, you just disconnected.
Yeah, so the question, I'm not sure whether my question went through.
No,
but let me just repeat one more time. So
yeah, if you can repeat it, please.
Okay, so the question goes, right, Vincent, what is the best way to tackle plastic, single-use plastic or plastic being released to the ocean? Should it be curbed from it being as a waste management infrastructure? Should we push that solution in that aspect, or should we be cleaning up what's already there in the ocean through different innovation that's already made available or is coming up that's been done by other companies or private sectors?
Yeah, that's a great question. And no, through my experience in the last year, I would say that one of the things that I really realized is that it's a highly complex topic, and there's not one solution that fits all. So my first answer would be, like, we need to do everything at the same time, but we really need to prioritize those actions that have the highest impact in the short term to prevent leakage. So working in some of these cities in Southeast Asia, improving waste management and household collection should be priority number one. At the same time, without addressing the issue of reduction and reuse, the problem very easily remain the same, because 25% of all the collected household waste actually leaks back into the natural environment. So unless we're able to reduce the overall size or the overall number of plastic being consumed and becoming waste, it's almost an unmanageable issue. One other important thing too is the topic of segregation. So in a lot of countries, household waste is mixed. So we throw our organic waste together with our inorganic waste, and we don't necessarily separate even the different types of plastics. So once you throw that in a mix, then after it becomes much harder to separate, and it also becomes much harder to actually retain any value out of it. So ensuring that there's segregation at source, and that you can then, for example, also reduce the amount of organics into the waste infrastructure system, that already ensures that there's a lot more efficiency, and that, for example, those at the end, that there's a lot less waste that you actually have to process.
Thank you, Vincent. Another question here. With the current situation that we have with the pandemic, and there have been a lot of news share that says that the environment is healing and is a good opportunity for things getting back on to its own original order, or if not, to a better order. And then there's also another discussion that talks about what is the new normal. Like, as an NGO, an NPO, as for WWF, I'm sorry. NGO, yes. In your opinion, would it make, in terms of these two debates, what is your standpoint on it? And also, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more of your insights and your thoughts with regards to that debate.
Yeah. So let me say upfront that any use of plastic as part of personal protection, so protecting your health, that is always a priority. So I'm personally, and I also believe WWF is definitely not advocating to reduce the amount of PPE. But we have to be very thoughtful around how we manage that increased volume of plastic that's being produced as PPE, but also other items. I saw a recent study in Bangkok that just over the last 2 months, there's been an uptake of the use of single-use plastics by around 40%. So that's a huge additional number. And it's a little bit misleading because we now sit at home, we look out of the window, and in most cases it's a clear blue sky. There's no airplanes. We're seeing videos of dolphins swimming in Venice, where the message is that nature is reclaiming the environment, and yeah, that is a little bit misleading because what we're really seeing, from at least from a waste perspective, is that we're using more plastic probably than before. That still needs to be confirmed, but that's our assumption now. Secondly, because of the economic crisis resulting from COVID, the oil prices have plunged, and as such, the recycling market has really taken a big hit. So it's now harder than before for recycled plastics to compete with virgin plastics. And the big problem with that is that the waste management system, so many of the local waste separators and waste pickers, they rely on this secondary market of plastics. And without that income, they can't really provide that service anymore. So that automatically leads to one, less recycled plastic, but also to an impact on the waste management system. And then eventually, what I'm expecting is that the economic hit that also municipalities will take will result in budget deficits and potentially less spent on waste collection and waste management, and therefore an increased likelihood that more people will discard of their waste in the natural world because they don't have another option. So I think overall there's probably more awareness for our relationship with nature than ever before, but I think also we need to now work harder than ever before to actually ensure that we address this issue.
Thank you, Vincent. So based on what you just shared with us with regards to waste itself, in communities such as in Asia, like in Indonesia, where the kampungs are, and Malaysia, Philippines, where the communities are very much reliant to some form of convenience, so like for example, they will use small sachets of maybe detergent or like small little FMCG's product. In terms of education wise in areas as such, with regards to the importance of behavior consumer behavior with regards to single-use plastic. What would be your advice for anybody or even someone within that community who feels, who has that kind of same sentiments, like they would want to have their area to be free from plastic as well? How could they go about working or connecting with WWF to get it all started?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe another thing that I didn't address as much in my presentation, but I think is really important, is that one of the key responsibilities lies with companies. So obviously, consumers have a big role to play in their behavior, and wherever they can try to reduce plastics. But very often, you're not even in a position to, for example, choose an item that has less plastic in it or other materials. So the issue of extended producer responsibility, where these producers also pay for waste management, but also work on reuse models where for a consumer it's convenient to reuse a certain product. I think that is really key. From a community perspective and trying to address this issue, I think we've seen some really inspirational stories of one local people advocating around this issue and successfully, for example, closing landfills because they were so highly polluting. But also communities working to introduce, for example, a new household collection system and making people aware why it's so important. So, yeah, for any people, please go to our website, plasticsmartcities.org, and you'll see an overview of those best practices and our projects. And we're always happy to connect with new people and see where we can potentially collaborate.
So Vincent, you did mention Plastic Smart Cities. What is the next project in pipeline?
So right now we are in the process of starting up work with, I would say, roughly around 20 cities from across those five countries. A lot of our current efforts are really focused on advocacy and getting the commitments from the highest level. So what cities do is they make a commitment to become no plastic in nature by 2030, and they commit to developing an action plan and to assigning a pilot area within their city where they demonstrate at least a 30% reduction of plastic pollution. So we are supporting these cities in this process by developing the action plan, but also collecting the data and doing detailed scoping studies to really understand where is the leakage happening, what are the types of plastics, and then also thinking about how can we address the underlying causes. Our next step, and I think most of this will also be set in motion by next year, depending on the current situation, but then that's where we will then go more into the implementation phase and start testing some of those new, for example, reuse models or working on improved household collection. We already have a number of other projects that are ongoing, for example, in the Philippines, where we've run an incubation program for local entrepreneurs in Manila, and we're also doing a roadshow for those entrepreneurs to go across the country and introduce them to municipal leaders to see if we can start new partnerships. Similarly, in Vietnam, we've been working with a local community on improving waste management and piloting some of those sort of new best practices. So there's already a lot of things happening. You'll also find more information on the website, but I think what is really key, and this is also our underlying strategy, is as WWF, but also even with the other NGOs, we can't solve it on our own. We need to really work all together, and we need to build those best practices and pilots that we can replicate elsewhere. And a lot of it has to do with the sort of, I guess, breaking the economic barriers that currently exist. So building models where the introduction of waste management and household collection actually leads to more employment, and where the city can say we can make this investment because it will have a lot of benefits for our local economy, but also for health and well-being of our citizens.
Vincent, could you set an example of a particular model? Let's say you want to work with a community with regards to creating jobs, perhaps, and also creating income for them. through, I don't know, maybe the collection of single-use plastic, maybe?
As I also pointed out in my presentation, there's a lot of unofficial employment. The waste pickers and the informal sector, they currently play a big role in recovering a lot of the materials in the landfills. But those jobs are their income are really low. Their work is dangerous. It's unhealthy. So helping, for example, the informal sector to become more formal and to give them to offer them jobs working still in the waste sector, but for example, separating the waste at the waste station. Those could be examples where you actually show that you're driving employment. Another area is around driving more circularity and building models that ensure that those products that we use, whether it's packaging or other items, can actually be reused. So, for example, all those local shops that currently sell the sachets, introducing also refill systems where people can come back and refill their own container. Those are all the types of concepts that we want to test in these plastic smart cities.
Is there a very good encouragement or support from each country's government sectors or agencies?
Yeah, well, we definitely seen. I guess like most of the countries in the region making this a key priority. Indonesia, for example, has a very ambitious national strategy, which sort of trickles down to all the different cities. So that is highly encouraging to see. Like I also mentioned earlier, these countries can't really solve it on their own. If we truly want to address this issue, we need to do it at a global level, and we need to have a UN level treaty on the topic of plastic. Because also another issue is the international trade of waste. You may have also read in the news there's plastic waste being shipped from Western countries to Asia, and while these countries are already trying to deal with their own waste, now they're being encountered with even more plastic that they need to manage. So having a global treaty and ensuring that the entire system in itself can work, I think, is key.
Let's bring it down a little bit lower. For example, like say a local social enterprise or like a student body kind of organization would want to push or support this the project of being may it be waste, may it be in terms of single-use plastic, may it be in terms of ocean beach cleanup, or whichever model that they choose to want to push that agenda across. What would be your advice for them if they would like to start that kind of initiative?
Yeah, I think this is a great point because ultimately it needs to happen bottom up. And I think one of the key ways for people to raise this issue is to make it visible and to really collect data and connect it back to the issue. So one of the examples that I wanted to highlight is, for example, a project that we're supporting in Bali, where two young entrepreneurs have built a very cheap system to catch some of the plastic in the rivers. So they're collecting that plastic and then they're treating that and trying to recycle wherever they can. But not only are they doing that, they're also working upstream with the community to help tackle the issue. A lot of the waste that ends up in the river is illegally dumped. So, for example, ensuring that those dump sites are closed is really important. But then also even bigger than that, going to your own municipal leader or mayor and flagging that this is something that needs to address at the city level or at the regional level. Another inspirational example I want to share is also in Bali. Two young sisters who were 12 years old at the time raised the issue of banning single-use plastic bags, and their organization Bye Bye Plastic Bags has now led to the policy that the plastic bags are banned in all Bali. So, even if you begin very small, your project can become really big. And I think the upside of this whole issue is that it has in itself already a lot of visibility and a lot of people care about trying to tackle it. But really starting small and showing results and showing that the actions that you're undertaking are actually having an impact down the line. I think that is key.
Thank you, Vincent, for your time. But before we go off, I have one more question that I would like you to...
Yeah, sorry, I'm still here.
to share with the community that's listening to us at the moment. This is the week of World Ocean Week. And as a diver and as an ocean lover and also an ocean citizen, what would be your message to everyone, especially in towards your love for the ocean right now?
Yes, so I really think we're at a pivotal moment in time. When I started diving early 2000s as a dive instructor, and in those years after, I've seen the ocean change. So I think now we're at a time where we still have an opportunity to reverse course. And I think for that, the next 10 years are the most important. So my message, I think, would be, one, make sure that you continue to enjoy all the beauty and benefits that the ocean is giving you personally. But secondly, really think about how you can make the future of your ocean part of your daily life and your career. Like, how can you make a difference? And I think there's a lot of different things we can do. It's about addressing plastic pollution. It's about reducing carbon emissions. It's about better protecting our oceans. And one way or another, all these things touch our daily lives, and they also touch businesses and organizations from around the world. So using your personal sphere of influence and purpose to help change those things where it matters, I think that is really key. And time is running out. So if we don't do it, then our future generations will go without an ocean that we love so dearly. And I'm sure that none of us wants to see that. So keep faith and work hard.
Thank you, Vincent. Before we go, I would like to share a screen of what's going to happen as we close for World Ocean Week. Just bear with me. Right. So right after this session, we'll be having a short film festival. Start at 12:30 for all our ADEX community all over the world. That we have put together a very interesting short film compilation with Sea of Freedom, Tears and Waves and Shark Eye, and also our ocean, what is plastic pollution. This is our special video which we collaborated with Plastic Oceans and also Sir David Attenborough. And right after that, there'll be a closing ceremony where you'll be able to see videos from Archipelago that will showcase Bali, Komodo, Banda, Sea, and Raja Ampat. The Coral Triangle that's going to cover Komodo and beyond 4K. Raja Ampat 2016. That's going to feature Omura's whale lunch feeding captured by drone, followed by Timor-Leste, the Blue Hope, and also a virtual dive of Sipadan, Sabah, 360 degrees. And of course, last but not least, our special video message for the Blue Hope campaign, and also for ADEX Pixel Virtual Expo, and also for everyone during the World Ocean Week itself. A message by Sir David Attenborough that's going to talk about we do not inherit the ocean from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So next is also another message that my colleague have shared with me, is that there'll be a lucky draw for anybody to take part on, to be able to win a 3 days, 2 nights stay at Liberty Dive Resort, which is worth around 780 Singapore dollars. So what you have to do is simply like and comment the next post that will be up together with the World Ocean Week closing video. You need to simply fill in a quick feedback form, and then we will be announcing the giveaway. Sorry, we will not be announcing, but we will be closing this lucky draw on Tuesday, 16 June. Please follow us as we'll tell you more when is the actual announcement of this competition. All right, so on behalf of everybody from Blue Hope campaign, and also British High Commissioner of Malaysia, and also Timor-Leste, and also ADEX Pixel Virtual Expo, and everybody that has been a part of us to be a part of this discussion throughout the whole week. We'd like to say thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you guys again when we are able to travel, I hope. Thank you again, Vincent. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you as well.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me, Nora. It's a great pleasure. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, we'll do. Goodbye, Vincent.
Bye.